Welcome back into the Illini Inquirer podcast. Jeremy Warner with Joey Wagner of Illini Inquirer, and we have so much to chat about today. Feels like so much has happened since the last time I've had Joey here on the podcast, and that includes Kofi Coburn coming back, Big Ten Media Days, of course, the tragedy that Joey kind of had to be in the state where it all happened. So we'll ask him about that story as well of Bobby Roundtree, but also the college football landscape changing before our eyes, kind of surprisingly, at least to everybody but Texas and Oklahoma here. So Joey Wagner, let's go, man. We got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, man, it's been a crazy couple of weeks and just getting started. It's fun to do this again.
Yeah, and we got training camp right around the corner. We're a week away from training camp, and we've started all our position primers for that. So we'll dive more into training camp and maybe preview that in a later podcast. But what do you think, Joey, of this realignment? Let's big picture here. This seismic changes for college football when Texas and Oklahoma, the two premier programs of the Big 12, are deciding to leave. And they basically made that official today by saying they're going to leave after their contract. They're not going to re-up with the Big 12 at the end of 2025. I think they'll be gone before that. I think they'll buy it out. And the Big 12 is going to be in scramble mode. What do they look like? Is there a Big 12 after this? But my mind immediately goes to the Big 10, right? Like locally, because the SEC is the best football conference. Now, maybe there's a year where the Big 10 might have more top 10 teams of Penn State and Michigan or Iowa or Wisconsin are all there. But it's clear the SEC is the one winning more championships. Alabama is a part of the SEC, and that's such a big part of it. Georgia, Texas A&M have been ridiculous here lately as well. So they have almost a super conference. And I guess big picture is don't let Ohio State and Michigan leave because or Penn State or whoever that is. But I don't think the Big Ten wants to expand, Joey, but I think they're going to need to. I think you have to strengthen yourself through all of this. And even though I'm exhausted by realignment still from like a decade ago, right? I don't think it's great for fans. I don't think it's great for rivalries and all that. It doesn't matter. It's all about money. And if the Big Ten still wants to be right up there with the SEC and bring in money, they're going to have to add here and make sure that they remain stride for stride with the SEC.
Yeah, and then so the big question is, what does that look like? For me, I thought for a reason I'm now, as I continue to read more coverage, I kept thinking like locally, what makes sense in this Midwest footprint? And I think a lot of us speculated, if the Big 12 goes up in flames and the fire is kind of starting right now, I think it was like, well, Iowa State, Kansas makes sense. And as I read more, I think, am I behind the times in thinking this has to be a local Midwest footprint edition? Obviously, the Pac-12 is kind of like there's some programs out there in a conference that, traditionally hasn't been one of the top end of the Big Five or the Power Five conferences. And would it make sense to get involved out west there or get into the ACC a little bit? I don't know, but I've had to, over the course, this really broke more or less Thursday at Media Days here. And like I think it was Thursday. I don't know that it was Wednesday. And you kind of like, okay, reevaluate. And the answer is, if you're going to expand, you're going to have to do it in a way that really, really makes. I mean, you can't just do it to do it. Like, how much does Iowa State and Kansas add to the Big Ten Conference? I don't know that it's a lot, but if you get out a little further and you make the geography work, I guess, then there's some interesting options, and it keeps you in that race with this monster that the SEC is probably going to be.
Yeah, like I think we heard in 2012, 2014, whenever it was, when they had a Rutgers in Maryland. It's not about geography. It might actually be about geography because it's more about TV markets. It's about population size. And I don't know how big of a factor that is. I still think it's a factor, even though people are cutting the cord, because there's still a lot of people, including myself, who have cable just because I think it's better to have cable now than spending on all these streaming services where it adds up to even more than cable. But I like live sports, and I think cable's still the best way of doing that. So Maryland and Rutgers, while they're not great programs for football, they've added huge TV markets. And obviously the Big Ten's money share has gone up since they've gone in, and they're now starting to get their share of that. Nebraska was more the geographical sense, historical, makes sense, good culture fit. Even though academically they don't fit the AAU thing anymore. They're the one non-AAU, which is, top research institution. They're the one in the Big Ten that isn't. But the Big Ten, reportedly, according to Adam Rittenberg, who's got a great pulse on the Big Ten, they would want to add another AAU program. So academics are very important to the Big Ten chancellors and presidents, and you still got a lot of great fits there, potentially. Even if your list of options, you're not going to take Oklahoma State, which could be athletically a pretty enticing option. You're not going to add them, right? So Big 12, Kansas and Iowa State both fit. I think regionally they fit extremely well. Kansas and Iowa State with the Big 10 West. If you move, whether it's Northwestern or Illinois to the East, you would have very good rivalries. You'd have really good rivalries with Iowa there, with Nebraska there. Those programs generally aren't good for football, but I do think they make some sense. But some people might see that as settling, right? When the SEC adds Texas and Oklahoma, you add Kansas and Iowa State. And this is a football conversation, right? This isn't about basketball. This is a football conversation. So even though Kansas is a blue blood in basketball, a good brand, football-wise, it's not adding a lot. I think Kevin Warren, who I don't know if proactive would be a term we'd use for him, Joey, or I don't know if being a great communicator is a term we'd use for him, but the ACC and the Pac-12 I'd shoot my shot for some of those programs. Like, I don't know if the ACC, those programs would feel compelled to leave. Duke, North Carolina, Virginia, Georgia Tech, Pittsburgh. I think all those teams would be great fits academically and athletically for the Big Ten. Georgia Tech with that Atlanta market would make a lot of sense. Duke and North Carolina with that Charlotte market would make a lot of sense. But I don't see them leaving the ACC. That seems to be a good fit there. The Pac-12 might be more vulnerable than we think. Last year, Big Ten programs, even in the pandemic, got $54 million payouts, right? The Pac-12 was 33. Okay. Like, that's a big deal. So USC, UCLA, Oregon, those are big brands. And that would be something huge for the Big Ten. I think Colorado can make the most sense culturally, geography, getting to Denver, a top 20 market. Nebraska and Colorado are longtime historical rivals. That can make a lot of sense. But I feel like I have to expand because I'm like, Kansas, Iowa State, to me, as a Midwest fan, makes sense. But this isn't about that. This is about financials. And a lot of those Pac-12 or ACC programs would make a lot more sense.
Yeah, and the same way, Jeremy. Like, we talked about this at length, when we were in Indianapolis, and we kept coming back to those two schools, Iowa State, Kansas. Like, it felt like, okay, duh. But yeah, you got to expand. The Pac-12 makes so much sense, man. There's so many markets out there. Los Angeles, let's just say it. And they fit in the academic area that the Big Ten's interested in. And now with the Pac-12, they have been kind of loyal to one another, those schools in the Pac-12. Would they do that? I don't know. I mean, money matters a little more to me than loyalty. And especially if you can keep, I don't want to say pace with the SEC, but you can keep within kind of an arm's length, I guess. And those schools out there certainly would be that. Now, people are going to hear this and say, well, goodness, how does travel? That's the easy stuff, right? The travel, all the games, the schedule. Are there pods in the Big Ten? We had kind of talked about that could make sense. And that stuff is easy. I mean, it sounds like it's not, but it really is. You can make that happen, no problem. But it's finding those right fits. And how big does Kevin Warren want to kind of shoot for the stars here? How much does he feel like he needs to? I mean, this is still a very lucrative conference, a very respected conference. It's the number 2 of the Power 5, right? I mean, the SEC is 1, the Big Ten is 2. I guess maybe someone could argue that. I don't know. But how much do you want to push that envelope into the middle of the table and say, you're not running away from us? I mean, we're gonna be here. And the Big Ten probably doesn't have to do that. I mean, financially, it's going to be there. But that 2023 TV rights deal, if you have, I don't know, California in the mix, the state, the Los Angeles area, money goes up on that a little bit. And that really shoots this price upward. So I don't think it has to be done, but I think it kind of does, right?
Yeah, the Pac-12, the Big 12, like, think about those schools like Iowa State or Kansas, I think at this point would run to the Big Ten. So I think it'd be a matter of, does Kevin Warren want to do that right away? Or does he hold out for, like a Texas A&M? Are they, excuse my language, pissed enough at the SEC to go get Texas and Oklahoma? They're like, we want to go somewhere else, because you had Texas A&M, you're adding Houston, right? You're possibly adding Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, like those markets all put together. Like Texas A&M would be a boon for them. Vanderbilt, I know athletically is not a big deal, but Nashville, it's a great academic institution. Athletics outside of basketball and football, they've been pretty good. TCU doesn't fit the AAU mold, but like I'm thinking of those programs. Kansas State seems like they're in a really rough spot. But if you're the Pac-12, you got to go add some of these programs, right? So is that Texas Tech? Is that TCU? Is it Oklahoma State? Like, they have to go add, because they're in a tough spot right now. ACC, I think it's pretty clear that Notre Dame, if they get scared of 4 super conferences and them being left out of a potential playoff in the future, they would just stick with the ACC. West Virginia would add. So the ACC looks like it'd get a lot stronger if they had those 2 programs. I think for the Big Ten, you got to keep up with them too, right? Like the SEC is one you got to keep up with, but the ACC as well. Make sure you stay ahead of the Pac-12 here a little bit. But those teams in the Pac-12, like or the Big 12. I mean, you add some AAC programs that could be good: Houston, UCF, Memphis, Cincinnati, but that conference is not a Power 5 conference, right? Compared to the rest of these. So it's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. And this is, Kevin Warren's had a tough start. And now he's getting thrown into this too. So Barry Alvarez was as their football kind of guy, their czar over football. He's got to play his cards right here, because I think he's going to be the one in all these conversations, and Kevin Warren kind of signing off on this stuff. It's a big time for the Big Ten to make sure that they stay, as strong as they have been.
You brought up a really good point, Jeremy. Here I am, like going in like a garage sale to the Pac-12, right? But like it could go the other way.
Yeah.
And they could add, and all of a sudden that foothold that the Big Ten had on that second place in the Power 5, that falls if the Pac-12 really starts plucking away some angry or displeased programs. So there's so many different ways this domino can fall, right? I mean, I don't know. I just think conventional thinking has got to go. It's just got to go, and by that it's really geographical. I mean, the things that matter, markets and academics. If you're the Big Ten, those are the 2 things. You don't care about anything else. You just don't. I mean, you travel, whatever. It's just,
can I be honest? Personally, I was like, I hate this. I hate this that Texas and Oklahoma are doing this. They're the Big 12, right? Like there's such great Texas area rivalries around that. I know they were the Big 8. There's conferences change and evolve and all of that, but like, man, them in the SEC, that just doesn't feel right. It feels to me super league-ish, which all the fans banded against and got that kicked out. And if they try, and like, there's rumors of them going after Ohio State, Michigan, like if they try that stuff, man, like that's terrible. That's terrible for the fans, in my opinion. And I know the business side of it, but at some point it's about the fans too. And that's why I'd be rooting for like Kansas and Colorado or Iowa State, because I think those are actually interesting, fan bases interact. There's rivalries there. There's geographic cultural fits. But I just know, talking about this, that's not going to be the number one thing. The number one thing is going to be who puts us in best position to make the most money and keep up with the SEC.
Yeah, and it's really interesting all this is happening, like, because the thing that the umbrella over some of this, and like you said, this is all football. Like anything else, if you get something good, like let's say Kansas comes to the Big Ten, that's just like the cherry on top, right? For basketball, like, oh, all right, you get Kansas, but the playoffs have expanded, right? Like I understand if this was a 4-team thing and this was like not something, then it's like, I'm going to the SEC. I'm going to give myself the best bet to be, an at-large, for a lack of better terms, the second or third. But so as they expand this out, it seemed all so perfect. It all fit perfectly, right? You take the Power 5 champions and you do some at-large, and everybody clapped and applauded and cheers and okay, great, like this thing's figured out. Now Texas and Oklahoma are like, no,
We,
No, that's good.
we want $20 more million a year that we deserve, right?
Yeah.
We're sick of floating all these other programs, right?
Yeah, essentially. And I guess money's money, man. I don't know. You can't blame them in that respect. Like, especially, I'm sure the pandemic didn't help anyone's budgets, right? And you have this carrot out in front of you of 20 more million a year, whatever the case may be. Man, it's hard to look away from that. I get it. I get that part of it, but I'm kind of with you. We've spent 20 minutes talking about this. And I'm like, all right, this is, and the thing is, it's not going to get any better for a while. I mean, these things don't happen very quickly, right? So like, we're going to be talking about this for a while, and people are going to roll their eyes and they're going to be fatigued because they're tired of hearing about it. But that's just where it is. And are there bigger questions in play here in Power Five athletics and the NCAA? Probably, man. This whole thing is on its head right now, and I don't know when it ends, but this is crazy, man. This is really crazy. And some of those rivalries you love, they're not going away, but now you're going to be like, okay, this team, I haven't cared about this team for 30 years. I don't really want to start now.
Right. Yeah, I didn't mention Missouri. I know a lot of fans will want me to mention Missouri as a possible fit. So that'd be good for Illinois, but I don't think you're adding a market. St. Louis and Kansas City, I think, are already in the Big Ten, but even if they are, they're not quite as big as some of the other ones we're talking about. And I don't know if Missouri would leave the SEC so quickly. They seem to be. I know they're struggling to compete a little bit, but I just don't see a lot of programs wanting to leave the SEC at this point. All right, Joey. Big Ten Media Days. This kind of overtook it, right? But I thought one of the big topics we got to hit on before we get into Illinois specific is Kevin Warren. I think he's a bright guy. I think he was an interesting candidate for this job. I thought Jim Phillips should have been hired. I thought he made the most sense, had the best relationships. And Kevin Warren had a tough first year under, I hate using this word continually, but unprecedented, really tough circumstances, right? But he got up at that podium, and I thought he had a horrible public performance. I think he was trying to speak to Big Ten higher ups, the athletics and chancellors, and maybe sponsors, but that was his chance to speak to fans, and he gave us really nothing. He gave us nothing about how he feels outside of federal legislation for NIL, which I think we all agree with. He just didn't really weigh in on anything. And I just thought, for a conference that needs leadership right now, I didn't think he provided a lot of it publicly. Now, maybe behind the scenes he's doing it, but a big part of these jobs is to portray leadership. And he just didn't really lead, I thought, from the podium the other day. And we barely get to hear from him. And when we have, he just hasn't, I don't think he's helped himself or the conference. And we saw all the missteps along the way. And I didn't even think he owned that very well. Like he said, I learned, but he didn't say he regretted anything or how he'd change it. I just think Kevin Warren publicly deserved a lot of criticism for basically saying nothing with a lot of words.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, we looked at each other a couple times during that, and it's like, and we finally said he's not going to answer anything. And he didn't. I know he's better in one-on-one situations. If you read people's reporting from interviews with him, he does, seem to have a plan or isn't afraid to say something. But in these situations where most people are going to consume his words, that's not great, man. And let's zoom in on the vaccination. He said it's decentralized. COVID protocols have been decentralized until they meet later on before the season. Well, we're almost 30 days from the season. You've got to have a plan in place. I'm sure this will come together. And in a month, we're going to say, okay, this is a Big Ten's plan and move forward. But you've had plenty of time to come up with something, and you don't have that something, and just really sidestepped everything. He appreciated every question. That was awfully nice to hear. And
he planted some questions too, which was interesting.
Yeah, and they kind of came up before, and somebody presented before, like, hey, Kevin has done a good job and this and that, and kind of almost tried to like
convince us.
Yeah, like when I read it, like, hey, let's be nice to Kevin today. It's been a tough go of it, and it has. Like, I don't want to take away from the fact that it has been difficult to be a first-year commissioner when you walk in to what Kevin Warren walked into last year. I get that. And I think there's a way that you can say, look, this was hard. This was really, really hard. And we messed up. We didn't walk down the right path every time we had the opportunity. This is how we'll be better. None of that. There was just none of that. And it was so disheartening, man. It really was, because we only really see him on the Big Ten Network.
Yeah.
That's the most FaceTime we get with Kevin Warren. And they push him a little bit, but he, in his first chance to really make a statement, I don't think he did. And to inside a little bit, they pushed his time up by about 15 minutes. So I thought, okay, they're expecting some questions. He's ready to rock here. Let's get something. And I could not have been any more wrong.
Yeah. And I don't get the communication strategy behind it all. Like, I know you can't say much about Texas and Oklahoma, but he evaded the question. Like, I'm interested to see what happens. Like, you have to say, what you have to, and I'm just a reporter, right? Like, we will do what is necessary to position the Big Ten moving forward as the premier conference in college athletics, right? As a premier academic, athletic, well, however you want to word it, but just show some confidence up there. Like, hey, we got this. It didn't feel like that. It didn't feel that way. And then, like NIL, he provided the one word where it's like, or the one phrase, federal legislation, which was fine. That's easy to do, but
that's not new. That's not new.
No, and it just, Jim Delaney, and I know that's a tough act to follow, right? But like Jim Delaney, when he got up there, he did say stuff, right? He did lead, and you could just tell there's a lot of communication. Like, we went from Kevin Warren to talking with Josh Whitman like 2 hours later, and Josh had thoughts about the Alston case and how that's going to affect everything. And I know a lot of people haven't delved into the Alston case, but that's very important. Diving into COVID in Illinois, having almost all of its football team at this point sounds like vaccinated, like all of those things. He had thoughts, a message about them, and we just didn't hear that from Kevin Warren. So I was like, just put Barry Alvarez up there, because he had a getaway thing and he didn't have all the answers. But man, like, I was listening to him, like, okay, that guy knows what's going on and knows what's at stake. Like Kevin Warren, it felt like, does he understand like what's happening right now? Because it didn't seem to be portraying it. I'm not saying you're panicking, but just show some leadership in an uncertain time.
Or at least, and Jimmy, we learned this pretty early. If you don't know, say it. Just say, hey, I don't know. This is kind of a crazy time right now, and I don't know. And would people have been mad about that? Sure, they would have, right? But to me, that's at least better than dancing left and dancing right, and then saying, okay, and who's next? Front row on the left here. That doesn't help. So I get it, man. I think Kevin Warren is qualified for this, and I just don't know what happens at the podium. Like, why does what happens happen? Because it really shouldn't.
Well, and that wouldn't matter as much if everything seemed smoothed over. Like, I know he gave hugs to every coach that came up on stage.
That was sweet.
But last year, obviously, in his first time where they need a leadership, he didn't communicate. He didn't communicate with the people, and he doesn't have those relationships. And that's where a guy like Jim Phillips would have really helped last year. But like, it's obvious he struggled during that time of making this decision, pulling back. And, when it comes to, last year's COVID issues, and he was asked repeatedly several times, do you have any regrets? Would you change anything? He kind of went into this philosophical, like, what is regret? And like all of this stuff. And it was like, just say, hey, we made this, like, this communications 101. We made decisions in real time, in an unprecedented time, that we felt put the players' health and safety at the forefront. And in hindsight, 2020, now we know myocarditis is not as big of a deal. But at that time, we couldn't say, go ahead and play, right? So we decided to be safe, rather be safe than sorry, okay? Like, so would I have changed that knowing what we know now? Sure, but we didn't have that at the time. So just own it. Just say that and put it in perspective that people can hear, and they'll be like, all right, that kind of makes a little sense. You get thrown this on your desk and, kids could die. Like, okay, yeah, you're going to stop for a second, rethink things, and maybe say, yeah, maybe my communication could have been a little bit better, all of that. Like, I wish I would have, communicated with the coaches and athletic directors daily about this. Like, just say some of that, own it, and people are going to forgive you. We're really forgiving society for the most part. Like, they'll move on if you just own some of it. And he didn't do that here.
No,
I hate piling on him right now, but that's the position, man. That's the position. I just haven't seen the necessary leadership out of it publicly yet.
No, and I'll say, I mean, he was asked some tough questions, but I don't think he was really grilled in the 5 or 6 questions he got. And it's effectively what you say. It is a forgiving system. It's mostly just you get grilled after you explain yourself, and we need more explanation, right? Like this was just like a cursory, could you please let us know what you were thinking? And that didn't happen. And then you're out of time. And I know some national outlets talked to him one-on-one, and there was a little more that came out of those, but it just leaves a lot to be desired in a time when college athletics are so under the microscope and there's so much changing. You cannot leave a lot to be desired. And like you said, it doesn't help it to follow up Jim Delaney. It doesn't. I mean, that's tough. That's going to be tough for anyone. And maybe in 3 years, Kevin Warren figures this out, or by 3 years from now, he figures this out and he's able to explain. You can't fake the credentials he has, right? Like you just can't. But you can sure as heck use them a lot better than what he's been using. And it was a really cringy press conference, to be honest with you, because at some point after the first or second question, it's like, oh, this is just going to be the whole thing. Like he's not just kind of like slowly getting up to speed here. He's not even going to be in the race. He's just going to say nothing for 35 minutes.
And I understand like, sometimes it's always like, don't make a headline. Just say nothing. Don't make a headline. Like politicians do that all the time. But whatever you say is going to be a headline, because this is the one time a year you speak publicly and take questions from anybody at the Big Ten Media Days. And he was only taking questions for 15 minutes because he talked for 30 minutes of a statement about
something. It was really just providing 3 press releases. Yes. I mean, his opening statement was basically providing press, and now they were important press releases, right? I mean, the things he has was like, you can just send us in an email, and I promise you, we'll catch up later. Yeah. That's what half of his opening statement was.
Yeah. It's kind of like Mel Tucker. Mel Tucker had like a 12-minute opening statement just about everything.
I thought he was gonna filibuster it, man.
Yeah. Take one question and be done with it. All right, Joey, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about Kofi Cockburn returning to Illinois, and remember somebody who's close to the Illinois football program as well. That's coming up next on the Illini Inquirer podcast. All right, Joey, I want you to be able to share the story, because it was I was feeling for you, man, because we wanted to tell Bobby Rountree's story, and you and I had talked like I don't want people to just forget. Hey, Bobby Roundtree came back to campus. No, he's great. Everything's great. He tweets out some videos that are really cool to see, and he's got a great attitude. Like, no, his day-to-day, man, is a lot different. And just because you don't see everything that happens day-to-day, his life is still being impacted every day by what happened 2 years ago. So you had set up with Bobby. We were going to send you down there and to meet with Bobby, and I'll let you take it from there, man, because I still remember your phone call, and I almost ran away from a restaurant without paying a bill when you called me. So it was really tough.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, we didn't want to forget Bobby's story. And I think it was awesome to see those videos, right? Because you're like, man, Bobby is just fine. But I think what I wanted to learn was exactly what you said. It's like those videos are even more special if you understand what happens in the other 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 30 seconds of his day. Like that, all of that I was just hoping to understand why those videos were special, but hoping to see that from a different lens and to understand everything that goes into that happening. So I'd set it up. He was excited. I was excited. We had talked Thursday, and I said, hey, I'm on an airplane, man. I'll be there in a couple hours. Give me the address, what time. He set that all up with me. He sounded genuinely excited to tell his story. I got some dinner when I got in, went over there the next day, and I said, hey, I'm here to meet with Bobby. And they said, he's not coming in today. And I said, no, I talked to him yesterday. I mean, I'm sure he is. I don't know if there's, misunderstanding. I said, no, we got a call this morning. There was some emergency. We don't really know what's going on. So your first thought is like, okay, you didn't know if it was emergency with him, with someone around him. I mean, there's such a broad term. So I said, okay, I texted the number that I had, and then I called you. I'm like, I don't know that I don't know what's going on here. You hope everyone in his immediate circle is okay.
But
But I said, let me
you're also thinking selfishly, it's like, hey, I just flew down here to do this story, and am I gonna be able to do this now?
right.
So like, if it was just a bad day or somebody, something at home came up, we don't know. So like, we didn't know what was kind of going on.
No, so I said, listen, man, let me get back to the hotel and kind of recalibrate a little bit, see if I hear from him, see if I hear from anybody. And I think I had messaged you probably about a half hour after, and you just had that feeling, right? Like something's not right here. And it reminded me a lot about, or a lot of rather, the day the initial accident happened, where you would see a couple teammates tweet an emoji here, a broken heart there, and you're like, something's up. And we had, somebody reached out earlier about his accident to you and I think a couple other people on the beat. And so when you start seeing these, it's like, holy crap, that was a real message we got. And we can't confirm, but certainly the pieces are kind of there that this happened. And that really started to be the case again on social media. And I told you, I mean, I don't feel good about this. Something's not right here. And then I don't know which, forgive me for not knowing which account tweeted it out that he had passed. And it's like a wave, man, because you saw this guy for 2 years go from, it just made so much strides, his arms, his he was just kicking down barriers, every one he faced, because that's what he does. And man, that was a lot to process. It was just an awful lot to process, because you think of his family and all that they have been through, and you think of his teammates and how much they just kind of gravitated to him before and after the accident. He mattered so much to them. And then after a while, it got confirmed, and I had called somebody who was close to him, and got it confirmed, and the university, and it's like, what do you do? I didn't know what to do. I mean, from a personal standpoint, it's like this.
Personally, I mean, you're there. Like that's it, just personally for you, it's like, I'm here right now as this goes down. Like, I was supposed to meet with him today. Like, I was just like, man, are you okay? Like, I wanted to make sure you were doing all right, because that's crazy that you're as many emotions you have for Bobby. Like, I was thinking about you too, my writer. Like, man, I hope you're all right.
Yeah, it was a lot to process. You talked to him the day before, right? I mean, it texted, and he seemed excited. And when you have a subject of a story who's excited to talk, you get excited, and you put a little pressure. Like, I'm here. You got to make sure you're doing this right, and so you're trying to process all that. And then I'll tell you, Brett Behrens from WCIA had texted me, and he's like, dude, about the same thing. Like, what is going on? So we ended up connecting on the phone. He was in Alaska on vacation, and he said, man, you're there. You're able to tell this story. And to be honest, I'm telling my boss this. I didn't think about that at first. I'm just like, where do I go from here? And Brett, being Brett, is a professional, and I was like, he's right. He's right. You got to figure out some way to tell this story. And the people at Stay in Step Rehabilitation who worked with him since the beginning of the calendar year in January were kind enough to say, hey, we close in a half hour or 15 minutes or whatever the case may be. And I said, look, I'll get there if you're willing to talk. And they stayed around for another half hour and talked. And I was really happy they did, because I think they saw a side of Bobby that none of us saw. And it wasn't a real, I'm not saying that in the sense of like the side we saw was fake, because it wasn't at all, but they saw every day how much he impacted everybody else in that building. And that's stuff that we didn't see. Bobby didn't tweet a picture of, hey, look at my friend I made talk today, or really brought a part of the circle. That's just not what happened. So it's nice to hear, like, okay, every personality trait that he had when we covered him for 2 years and that we have heard around the building in Illinois, it's all happening still in Florida. And that it meant a lot to hear that, honestly, because we just didn't, those aren't people that we had heard from very often. And I really can't thank them enough for taking some time and talking. And I'll tell you, I called them. And before that, I said, hey, I was here earlier. I had assumed they'd known. I said, I just want to tell you thanks for, you know, at least welcoming me in. I know that's kind of a hurdle to get over, to bring in a reporter to a rehabilitation
Right.
center. And they said, we haven't heard an update. And I said, you know, unfortunately, I filled them in, and you know, they really processed this in about an hour and a half, and welcomed, you know, back to have a conversation, which was, that was huge. And they could have easily said, it's Friday, it's a lot to process. You know, I'm so sorry we're leaving, but it was a tough couple days, man. I mean, there's so much you got to, from a professional standpoint, we do still have a job to do, and you've got to figure out how to best do that job for a cross country trip. And then from a personal standpoint, you want to approach the situation with the right amount of delicacy and not push and, you know, insert yourself into a story that isn't your story while making people uncomfortable. And it was, I've never done that, man. It was a tough balance to try to find, and really the staff there was incredible in helping me find that balance.
Yeah, you told the story really well. I told it to you personally, but I'm so proud of that story and how you handle yourself there. As for Bobby, man, like I remember that recruiting win. It was so big for them, so big for Andrea Stoker and Mike Fair, and especially Lovie Smith, that invested so much time into him. And you know, I've been able to catch up with a couple people close to him since then. I'm going to continue to do that because we want to continue to tell his story. And I've heard Lovey has been so supportive of the family in recent days, and that their, you know, memorial service Lovey had a big role in. And I don't have quite the details to tell everything about that, but like Bobby meant a lot to Lovey Smith. And Lovey kept saying when he was a player, he's everything you want. He's talented, obviously. He's got some Julius Peppers kind of things to him, but that his work ethic and his leadership and his you know, attitude was contagious. And that's exactly everything you want in a player. And I gotta be honest with you, part of the reason I wanted to do the story, or like I was like, man, we gotta do another Bobby story. We got to go see him. We gotta go see what his day is like. Is the NFL draft. When I saw Kendrick Green and Nate Hobbs get drafted, I thought this was supposed to be Bobby's day. And it might have been a year prior, right? Because Bobby was the best player on that team after his sophomore year. He was their best player, and he was one of their leaders. And that shook me when I got the message that Bobby had the accident, and reporting on that shook me. And then, you know, you see him slowly but surely, you start getting glimpses of Bobby, and then you see him come down to campus. And it was an eye-opener, I think, for a lot of fans of just how much Bobby had changed. And it was scary a little bit, but it was also great to see him be able to be out there and put himself out there. And then you started to see him gain confidence. I'd heard, you know, his body was starting to react a little bit better. It was going to be a long road for him to walk. And I don't know if he ever was going to do it, but boy, he was set on it. And, you know, he came back to campus, he was on campus, and then COVID hits, right? And, you know, he's not able to see a lot of his teammates, former teammates, and a lot of Illini players couldn't go over and see him because of COVID protocols and all of that. And you know, that's part of the reason he went home to Florida and to start all of this. And man, I can't imagine all the dark days you go through when you were that close to changing your family's lives. And Bobby didn't come from anything, right? And the fact that he became that hard worker with that talent and seemed on the precipice, it was a sad story, but he was making it an inspiring one, right? Like he wanted to inspire people. He wanted to be a speaker. Like he wanted to, you know, provide inspiration for people, and you know, he wanted to tell his story, and that's why I was so excited that he wanted to tell it. And I'm just sad that this is the way the story went, because it felt like even though life had thrown him this terrible curveball, he was going to try and make the most out of it and help people as much as possible. So, man, I feel for his family. I feel for his teammates. I feel for the fans, all of that. But mostly I feel for him because he had a world of potential, and man, life isn't fair. But hopefully, and Josh Whitman, you asked him the question, but you know, Josh Whitman couldn't have been better in what he said and his message about Bobby, and they will honor him, whether it's, I don't think they'll retire his jersey, but I think they might honor his jersey if someone gets it every year on the D line, or they'll find some way. But I hope people know the full story, and we'll continue to try and say that. It wasn't all great, right? After this accident, after he got back to campus and in these videos. But man, like he seemed to have as positive an attitude as possible through it all to kind of work his way through it and, earn your weekend, all that stuff. Like, man, it sucks. It sucks.
No, I know recently a lot of people have been frustrated with Lovey, fans, that is. There was not a better, I thought Lovey cared about his guys, man. There's no doubt. And I thought the best way he showed that, he showed that, I'm sure, a lot behind the scenes, that he cared, but he wasn't going to advertise to us like, hey, look what I did here or there. But he did do a lot of things, and he stayed with Bobby in that hotel room in Florida after the accident, and it's unbelievable. There's not enough credit to give to Lovey for doing that, and that shows how much he cared, and he was involved in keeping conversation. I thought a lot about Lovey that day because of exactly what you talked about. When this relationship with Bobby went back a long time for Lovey Smith, and he cared. Even if before the accident, if you pulled Lovey aside and you were just talking, and he spoke glowingly of Bobby. This wasn't just a when the recorders are on type of thing. Lovey's going to say things. This was every bit as genuine and authentic as anybody has with anyone else. So I thought a lot about Lovey, and I was glad to hear he was still in contact with the family and making, I know, it sounds like he went to the memorial service for Bobby, and that it's a heartbreaking way for this story to end, because it shouldn't have ended this way.
And I can tell you, Lovey was an inspiration to Bobby, because Lovey came from nothing in Big Sandy, Texas, and an African-American man turned himself into a millionaire via the NFL. That was what he was telling Bobby. You can do this too, and I can help you get there. And he was close to being there, right? So I feel comfortable saying, because Lovey, that was one of his messages to him throughout the recruiting process. And Lovey was the reason Bobby Roundtree chose Illinois. So yeah, that relationship was really, really special. I think Lovey Smith treated him like a son. And I think, he didn't advertise that he stayed in that hospital room, right? We got
Josh
that.
Whitman did.
Yeah, Josh Whitman did. And I think Josh wanted to let everybody know the man that he had as his head coach. So I thought that was cool. All right, there's no good way to transition, so let's take a quick break, and we will talk about Illinois basketball with Kofi Coburn coming back. We'll talk about that next on the Illini Inquirer podcast. All right, Joey, we haven't gotten your thoughts on Kofi Coburn coming back. Pretty good little offseason here for Illinois, despite everything that happened.
Man, I wrote this, and what an offseason, right? I mean, like, it went from like, is this a bubble team? What is, what does this team look like? Who in the world is going to be an assistant coach on this team? What does, goodness gracious. And then all of a sudden, Brad Underwood and his coaching staff drives this thing right back to where it ended last year for the most part. I mean, you lose Io, there's no easy way to replace him. And you put the cherry on top with Kofi, man, and he elevates the floor and the ceiling, right? I mean, I don't think anyone looks at Illinois preseason and is like, yeah, I can see them anywhere between 3 and 6 in the Big Ten. It's like, I can see them between 1 and, let's conservatively say, 4, right, in the Big Ten. It was such a weird situation to re-recruit an All-American, who had been 100% in on the NBA draft, and then not. And then in the portal, it's like every day something changed, be it a little bit, be it a lot of it. And they ended up back in the best possible spot they could have ended up, to be honest with you. I mean, the only thing better is if you don't lose Adam Miller to the transfer portal, I think.
Yeah, and yeah, Dawson Garcia or something like that,
right? Right, yeah. But to get Kofi back, and he seemed, and talking to him, I was really curious how he was going to answer. So I think I knew the tone he was going to take, right? I mean, there's not really many tones to take if you're Kofi and you're meeting the media after coming back. And we all know kind of the road here, but I thought his answer seemed really genuine. I think when he talked, and you understand his backstory a little bit, that he didn't play basketball. He came from Jamaica, and all of a sudden now this sport, and by default a little bit Illinois, I mean, he was going to be a star really wherever he went in college. I don't want to say Illinois made him this, that, or the other. Certainly helped him evolve in some of his games. suddenly he like can't go anywhere without being like, hey Kofi, oh, welcome back. That's incredible. That is incredible, man. 6 years ago, 7 years ago, that was not his experience. And now because of this, and he's back at a place that is going to treat him like that, right? I mean, he walked into the basketball tournament on Saturday in Peoria. You would have thought it was a rock show. Like there's a game going on and nobody was watching the game. They just watched their 7-foot preseason Big Ten Player of the Year walk in, and that again, anywhere if he would have elected to transfer, he was going to be a big deal wherever he landed. But now you really feel it. I think you see it on social media, you feel it in being around. It's like, dude, you are like a rock star in this state.
He needs to learn that you got to charge for those pictures and autographs now. Like, he can totally do that. No, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, I'd say I'm more conservative with this stuff. Like, I think they're a top 10 team. I think I'm between picking them 1 and 2. I think 5 is the floor in the Big Ten, right? I think top 25 throughout the year. Because maybe something doesn't go right. Maybe it takes time for this team to gel with all the new pieces. But they do return a lot, right? I mean, Adam Miller is gone, but you replaced him with Alfonso Plummer, who's an even better 3-point shooter, not as good defensively, obviously. Omar Payne is your backup 5 right now, who might play a little 4 if he can shoot like Brad Underwood says he can, though we haven't seen it on a court yet. And then Coleman Hawkins a year older, obviously Andre Curbelo a year older, Trent Frazier and DeMonte Williams are back. The mystery man that is Austin Hutcherson is healthy right now. Jacob Grandison is there. That's a deep team. That's a deep team with a lot of options. You can play a lot of different ways, but at the end of the day, you have the best center. You could say along with Drew Timme. I'd love to see that matchup, but you have the best center in the Big Ten, one of the top 2 centers in the country with Drew Timme, and just a guy who completely changed the game. Sure, he's got some flaws, and if you're as good as Loyola at it, you can exploit it, but not many teams could in the Big Ten, and they had the book on him. So I agree. The floor is immensely higher. And then the ceiling is going to depend on how all those other players kind of come about. But with your floor being higher, your ceiling's certainly higher than it was before he came back. It's just all of a sudden you are elite at the rim, right? Like you are going to be bad on the glass and probably struggle at the rim. Like Payne's a good shot blocker. He's a pretty good finisher around the hoop. He's not quite Kofi Coburn, and he's certainly not Kofi Coburn as a rebounder. So as a rebounding team in the Big Ten, that's so important. And Kofi just completely makes you one of the best, along with Purdue and some of those other top programs. And Michigan will be up there with Hunter Dickinson back. But now, like, Michigan's got to worry about matching up with you, not the other way around. Purdue's got to worry about matching up with you, not the other way around. Not to mention all those Big Ten teams without a real center, right? And then you can throw Omar Payne in as your backup instead of Georgie Bashashvili. Like, Georgie's doing well in NBA workouts, but you know, Omar Payne defensively is way different and has a way higher ceiling given the talent level that he has. So it's just it's a game changer and a program changer that now Illinois is going to have 3 straight years of a top 10 finish in the Big Ten, right? 3 straight years where you're in the discussion for a top 5 seed in the NCAA tournament. And you can dream bigger than that, right? Like Illinois can dream Final Four, they can dream Big Ten championship, but just another year where you're at that level, man, that's a game changer for recruiting. And Illinois is taking advantage of that already, right? With Jade Epps and Sincere Harris with Chester Frazier. And now we'll see what else they can add to this with all the other targets. Derek's been reporting on where it's Jaden Shute or Braden Huff or Cam Corrin. Like, you are way more enticing to those guys and the long term, given the success you are having and will continue to have this year. And then we've talked about Kofi legacy wise, man. I call Lauren Tate up just to make sure I wasn't wrong. I'm like, best big man ever, right? Like, who else is in the conversation? He said, yeah, you're probably right. I mean, Johnny Red Kerr had a great last year, and you know, there's other good centers that have come through Illinois, but no one really in the modern history has been as good as him, unless you're putting Brian Cook as a center, which most people wouldn't. Like, he's just going to be known as one of the best players ever at Illinois.
You know, a couple things. One, I do wonder which Big Ten coach and player had the worst reaction behind closed doors to Kofi coming back. Like, that cannot be a fun thing to see if you're in a
Indiana.
Yeah, maybe they probably are not thrilled to see.
Iowa.
Yeah, I mean, especially now without Luka, now you just got some guy you made really mad for 2 years without anyone to get in his way. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Like I'm just thinking, I want to remind people, like the Big Ten is going to be weaker this year, right? Like the top is still pretty dang good. Michigan recruiting as well as anybody in the country right now. Ohio State, Purdue. I'm really high on Purdue. Ohio State's going to be really good, and they're recruiting at a high level. Michigan State should bounce back. I think Maryland will be good, but Iowa got a lot worse, right? Minnesota is going to be awful. Nebraska is not. They're getting better. And I think Fred Hoiberg's starting to recruit at a pretty high level now, but they still aren't ready to compete in the top half. Northwestern should be better because everyone's back, but that's not necessarily good. Penn State got worse. Rutgers could be in the NCAA tournament again, which is great for them, but Miles Johnson was a significant loss for them. Even though they get Harper back and Omaruri could be good. Geo Baker, I've always thought is overrated, but he's a good player. Wisconsin got a heck of a lot worse. Indiana might have gotten better, but how much better? You know, like Illinois takes a huge leap when all these other programs are a lot of these other programs are kind of resetting here.
You know, I think you nailed it too with recruiting, Jeremy, is like before Kofi, like imagine this team without Kofi. I know people did that forever and they don't want to have to think about doing that anymore. But like I think Illinois would have been fine. Like they would have been good. They would have been tournament team. Right. I think it's fair to say without Kobe, they're probably a tournament team. But like they might be a team that maybe starts getting that national exposure, those primetime games like later in the season as teams realize that, or networks, I suppose, reporters, national reporters realize like, hey, Andre Curbelo, he's pretty gravitational. Like we want to put him on TV, we want to get him in stories, and then you go from there. They're starting out that way. This is going to be from the shoot. Like people are going to be nationally interested in this team. Now, whether that looks like more broadcasts on the ESPN platform, or whatever that looks like in a TV rights deal, but also you're just going to, I mean, my first couple of years on the beat, it's like a national reporter came in. It's like, Michigan State's here today. That's why they're here. Right now, it's like, you're not, you look at someone like The Athletic, like ESPN, even on our boards, it's like, hey, check out this story. And you see it maybe every, couple months, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. I would imagine it's going to be more than that. And it's going to be power rankings. You're going to see Illinois' name. That helps, man. That helps when you can tell a recruit we're on ESPN this many nights a week. And, look at all these stories and all this attention we're generating. That helps on the recruiting trail. And it sounds silly, but name, image, likeness, you want that. You want as many eyeballs as you can have on you. And Kofi helps that. Kofi's presence back in Champaign helps all of that. And it should have a trickle-down effect. How much? I don't know. I mean, you still got to sell winning. You still got to sell NBA development, playing time. All of that stuff doesn't change. But having Illinois as a topic of conversation more often and in larger circles, that only helps things.
Yeah, and this team is going to have to evolve, right? Because there's newness to them. They're going to have to figure out their roles without Io. You don't have this guy who could just bail you out anymore. But I do think it's a really intriguing roster and one that I look at their non-conference schedule. That's for sure, right? Like Marquette, Cincinnati, Arkansas, or Kansas State, Notre Dame, and Missouri. And I go, they should probably win. They should be favored in all those games, right? Like I thought the non-conference could have been really tough with Kofi Coburn going. And then you get into a Big Ten that's really tough. And you're just going to get bully balled, I thought, because you just don't have Kofi Coburn. You don't have anybody like him when other Big Ten programs like Purdue and Michigan do. So I just think, now you look at that non-conference, it doesn't scare you. The rest of the Big Ten doesn't scare you. This is a team that I think should be 20 plus wins for a third straight season, shooting for 23 or 24 again. And towards the top of the Big Ten, towards the top of the country, at least ranked throughout the season. One guy, man. And that's, you get Io back. Like that would have been massive, right? He's one of the best players of all time here, but Kofi Coburn just makes such a huge impact on the team. And I think along with Io, he's made as big of an impact as anybody in recent memory.
Yeah. And again, I think a lot of this would have happened at some point next season, not to the degree I expect it to happen, but they would have been okay enough to get a lot. I mean, I'm not saying like without Kofi, this isn't, but it does, it changes so much on so many different levels. And I think you asked Brad this, Jeremy, we had talked about it. Who could have reasonably imagined to that Jordan story when Io committed that you would get 3 years of him and then get 3 years of a top 50 center out of I think he was in the top 50 of his recruiting class.
Who was an All-American, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the thing is Iowa's all Big Ten didn't leave after 2 years. That doesn't happen that often. Kofi's an All-American center at 7 foot and he stayed for another, like him and Drew Timme are those rarities where they're quite not great enough for the NBA, but great college players. That's like, man, you get 3 years of those guys. That's an unbelievable advantage.
And with those two, like you said, not exactly NBA fits as we would think, but I think you asked Kofi this. You could be a career college player and make some pretty nice coin and then try your hand at the NBA. You know, if you're not getting if Kobe doesn't get the feedback next year, I'm not saying like, hey, look out, a couple more years of this guy. But if he doesn't get the feedback and he's got a year of NIL numbers under his belt to know what he could make, I don't know what's going to happen with him, but you could see as this thing moves forward and numbers start to be a little more secure, like, hey, financially it makes sense to stay around a little bit. Now that probably doesn't always look like 4 years, maybe it's 2, maybe it's 3, but it might be one more than what you thought it was going to be without. And it's a pretty good situation for them, and it doesn't happen much before, and I don't know how much it'll happen. Maybe it won't, because the NBA is still the NBA and people want to play there. You dream of doing that. But it does open some maybe interesting thought processes in these after the season and these off-season discussions.
Yeah. And I just think it puts everybody in position to succeed. Like Coleman Hawkins now playing the 4. Like that is the best spot for him. And sure, playing time is not going to be as much for him, but like he's in a better position to succeed. Like Omar Payne, probably not the happiest Kofi's coming back, but he's going to be part of a really good team. And at some point he's going to take over and maybe have more opportunities to showcase his jump shot, which if he hits that, along with Kofi, like that's going to showcase him a little bit more. But I think Andre Curbelo, man, like what a boon for him, not just as a player, but I've mentioned it before. NIL, like, is there a better duo? Is there a better duo right now for NIL at this school with this program? Like, I think Curbelo can make a lot more money now with Kofi by his side. And I think that's going to be fantastic. Like, out of everybody in college basketball, feels like outside of some of these guys that just have more Instagram followers or, Master P's son, like some of these like random ones, but in terms of like a quality player, like it feels like Kofi can take advantage of this if he plays his cards right as well as anybody.
Yeah, Gonzaga might have a duo that could really go up against Kofi and Curbelo. But yeah, that's from a basketball standpoint, how could you be happier than Andre Curbelo? All you have to do for somebody who is a generational passer to begin with, all you have to do is just put it literally somewhere near or around the rim, and one of those two big gentlemen will grab that ball and throw it in the hoop as hard as they possibly can. It's a pretty good win for Andre Curbelo, man. And Omar Payne's going to practice against Kofi, right? I mean, that's not going to hurt anybody. And like you said, I think the jump shot's an interesting element. If he's in a position to show that a little bit, hey, good. NBA teams do enjoy players who can shoot the basketball. That's clear.
Joey, are you team Austin Hutcherson all Big Ten, or are you team Austin Hutcherson bench player?
God.
There's nowhere in between right now.
I can't go anywhere in between, huh?
That's where you and I probably are, because we're it's like, hey, he's a really intriguing guy. He's a really 6'6", obviously athletic, 42-inch vertical we hear, and jump shooter. And I see the YouTube highlights or his Twitter highlight, and it looks good. Like it's like, man, that the idea of that guy sounds awesome. Just need to see it on the court. And if I see it a couple of times on the court, bought in, man. I just got to see it on the court. And hopefully he's healthy enough to do it. Like, this is no shot at Austin, right?
No,
just the fans who think definitely all Big Ten, definitely starting every game. It's like, maybe if he stays healthy and as good as, some people think he is, or he could be a really nice piece off the bench with Alfonso Plummer and Omar Payne and Coleman Hawkins, where you got maybe one of the best benches in the country. But he's an intriguing piece they don't have. I'm excited to see him. I'm excited for him to be on the court. Hopefully he stays healthy all the way. But the conversation's always fun with him.
Here's what I keep coming back to is like, we all know his story, right? D3 player, the injuries. And Brad Underwood is a smart guy. How much would it benefit him if you truly don't know, right? Like, how much does it benefit him to hype him up so much if he had any doubts?
Right.
Like, and I know he's always been that person to like step up and really, really promote his guys. Some not quite have worked out.
But he's the best passer he's ever seen.
Yeah, that one I can safely say did not work. But knowing kind of what Hutcherson has been through and the D3 thing, it does not benefit him, to benefit Brad to say what he says. Like, you open yourself up for way more than if you just said, hey, we're encouraged with how he looks in camp as he's come back from what's really been a tough hand. That would be, but he has not really done that. And, if you talk to people around there, it just doesn't benefit them, I don't think, to try to really push this on this team. Right? Like, if this were 2 years ago and you need somebody to be excited about in the offseason, maybe it makes sense, but it doesn't make sense to push unless you really believe it. So I lean a little bit more towards like could be a pretty significant X factor, a pretty good player for this team, than the other of like, oh my God, how do you expect anything? I don't lean that way. I could be wrong. I mean, people have been wrong before. It just doesn't add up to really push this narrative so far if you have any small doubt.
Yeah, he is an intriguing piece they don't have. If healthy, he's going to help them. I think he can be a significant contributor to the team. I just don't know what the range of possibilities with him are just so big, because, at one point you look at him, you go, that's kind of what an NBA wing looks like. And then the other point is, I haven't seen him on a court against a Division I player, even though we hear great things about what he did with Io, right? Like, so hear great things. Now we got to see it. And I hope for him that we do see it soon. So I just had to get that hot button issue out there, but Joey Wagner, appreciate the time, man.
Thanks, man.